Today we are going to have a little look around Bradford's oldest residential building. Now this place has had centuries of drama associated with it, especially during the English Civil War, and there's one room in particular that I'm keen to get and have a look around because it's where one of the oldest recorded ghost stories in Yorkshire, possibly in England, ever was said to have taken place.
Bolling Hall stands just southeast of Bradford city centre, on a rise that once overlooked open countryside rather than terraced streets. Long before Bradford became the industrial powerhouse of the 19th century, famous for its wool trade, its mills and its chimneys, this land belonged to medieval lords and powerful families whose fortunes rose and fell with the tides of war. Parts of Bolling Hall date back to the 14th century, though the site itself is believed to be far older, with timber and stone added and altered across the centuries. What survives today is a patchwork of medieval structure, Tudor additions and later Georgian refinement, each generation quite literally building upon the last. It has been a family home, a symbol of status, a royalist stronghold during the English Civil War, and eventually, by the early 20th century, a crumbling relic of the past. In 1912, when the hall had fallen into serious disrepair, it was sold to Bradford Corporation for a token sum. After 3 years of careful restoration, Bolling Hall reopened as a museum in September 1915. Welcoming over 2,000 visitors on its very first day. Within 2 years, that number had reached 200,000. Today, its rooms are dressed to represent the centuries it has survived. Medieval chamber, Jacobean grandeur, Georgian comfort, each space an echo of the lives once lived here. For all the centuries it has endured, Bolling Hall does not simply preserve history. Some believe it remembers it.
Hello friends and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire, this is the Wanderlust Way. First off, let me say a massive thank you to everybody that supports the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, becoming members, sending super thanks, sending donations. Honestly, I could go on and on and on. But everything that you're doing is helping the channel to grow. It's allowing me to carry on with adventures like this and sharing the stories that I find with you. Okay, so today I also want to say a massive thank you to Bolling Hall itself for giving me permission to film. Now, this is supposed to be one of the most haunted houses in England, and there's said to be around 20 ghosts here, and it attracts the paranormal enthusiasts from all over the world. You may have already seen some of the bigger YouTubers have already been here, and it did appear on Most Haunted, I think it was 2005 time. There's one ghost story in particular that's really famous, but the others are extras on top of that. So if you're ready for a spooky wander around Bradford's haunted house, then pull up a chair, and that's enough waffle. Let's wander. This hall had such a dark reputation at one point that the local newspaper put out a little bit of a competition, a little bit of a challenge to see if anybody would spend the night here alone. Now, funnily enough, nobody was ever able to claim that reward, which only made that dark reputation grow even more. So before we have a really good explore around, have a think in your minds. Would you stay in this hall overnight on your own? Think about what your answer is, and then by the end of the video, by the time we've heard all the stories and we have explored it all, let's have your answer again. Let's see if it's the same.
Bolling Hall's reputation does not rest on a single story. It rests on accumulation, centuries of sightings, whispers and unease that have clung to this building long after its residents moved on. Among its most enduring figures is the White Lady, a pale apparition said to move quietly through the hall, most often near the staircase. Accounts of her presence stretch back generations, and she is often described as one of the earliest recorded hauntings associated with the building. Whether grief-stricken widow, restless resident, or something less easily explained, her story has become inseparable from the hall itself. By the Victorian era, Britain was in the grip of a fascination with death and the afterlife. Spiritualism flourished, seances were fashionable, mourning rituals were elaborate and prolonged. Death was not hidden away. It was studied, photographed, even conversed with. It was during this period of heightened obsession with the unseen that Bolling Hall's ghostly reputation truly cemented itself in local consciousness. The hall at that time was still a private residence, though no longer the seat of medieval power it had once been. Its age, its atmosphere, and its layered history made it the perfect breeding ground for rumour. And rumour, once rooted, has a habit of thriving. Even today, that pull remains strong. Paranormal enthusiasts travel here deliberately, hoping to experience something for themselves. The building has featured on national television, including an investigation by Most Haunted, which aired in 2005, further embedding it within Britain's catalogue of reputedly haunted locations. But television cameras and modern ghost hunts are only the latest chapter. Bolling Hall's reputation was already firmly established long before infrared lenses and EMF meters arrived. And that longevity, that persistence, is perhaps what makes it so compelling.
I recently picked out an article in one of my old Yorkshire books, and it was a story about Richard Tempest, who once lived at Bolling Hall. Now, it was said that he was a bit of a gambler, and that in one game of cards in particular, he actually gambled away Bolling Hall itself. And there was a little phrase in that book that said, ace, deuce and tray, or Bolling Hall forever and I believe. Anyway, I did some research. I couldn't actually find any historical reference to him losing the hall in a game of cards. However, he does have another story towards his life and his death that is very, very tragic.
To understand Richard Tempest, we have to go back further to the medieval origins of Bolling Hall itself. The site is believed to date back to the late 13th century, with the surviving timber-framed hall largely built in the 14th century. It was originally the home of the Bolling family, local lords whose name the house still carries. Through marriage, inheritance and alliance, as so often happened in medieval England, the hall passed into the hands of the Tempest family. The Tempests were no minor gentry. They were influential Yorkshire landowners whose loyalties during the turbulent 15th century placed them firmly on the Lancastrian side during the Wars of the Roses. Bolling Hall, therefore, was not simply a domestic residence. It was a symbol of allegiance, lineage and political identity. Families like the Bollings and Tempests did not merely live through history, they were entangled in it. That lineage is still visible today in the Tempest window, a striking piece of stained glass that displays the family's heraldic arms. The window is more than decoration, it is a statement of status and survival, a reminder that this house once stood at the centre of regional power. But power in Tudor England was precarious. In 1536, Yorkshire became one of the heartlands of the Pilgrimage of Grace, a vast uprising against Henry VIII's religious reforms. Richard Tempest became involved in the rebellion. When it collapsed, the Crown responded ruthlessly. Arrests followed, executions were ordered. Richard Tempest was imprisoned, and in 1537 he died in custody. So while Bolling Hall may not have been gambled away across a card table, it was certainly shaped by risk, defiance and consequence. The Tempest survived in name and memory, but not without cost.
So there's a little piece of paper here and it says the baby's cradle. At the time the Tempest lived in Bolling Hall, infant mortality rates throughout the country were high and children often died before they were 5 years old. Rosamund and Richard Tempest had 13 children in total. They're the children, and it said, unfortunately, Robert, George and Christopher all died young. A cradle this size could accommodate more than one child and was made to last a long time. A new baby would have been born in the mother's chamber, moved to a village wet nurse or to a nursery in the house a little later. It says on this sign, this room was built in the early 16th century by the Tempests and was probably an additional bedchamber. Rosamund and Richard Tempest owned Bolling Hall at the time and had inherited it from Rosamund's father, Tristan Bolling, who died in 1502. This is where it gets interesting. It is believed the siege of Bradford was planned in here during the English Civil War, 1642 to 1651. The objects and information on display give insight into life during this time. So they planned it in this room. That is mad. When you flick through the history books about Bolling Hall, there's quite a lot about the Civil War reference to it, and that's really, really important because this was a royalist stronghold during the siege of Bradford in 1643, and it's also at the point where our first ghost enters the narrative.
By the mid-17th century, England was divided. King Charles I and Parliament were locked in a brutal struggle for power, and Yorkshire became a battleground of shifting loyalties and violent confrontation. Bolling Hall stood firmly on the royalist side. In 1643, as tensions escalated, the Earl of Newcastle, commander of the King's northern forces, used the hall as his headquarters during the siege of Bradford. The siege itself was fierce. Earlier skirmishes had already fuelled resentment, particularly the death of the Earl of Newport, one of Newcastle's officers. Separated from his men, Newport reportedly asked for quarter. According to royalist accounts, he was told he would receive Bradford quarter and was struck down. The phrase became a bitter symbol. Enraged by Newport's death, Newcastle is said to have sworn vengeance, ordering that the town be given the Bradford quarter in return, that men, women and children should not be spared. It was on the night before that threat could be carried out fully that the story takes its strange turn. As Newcastle slept here at Bolling Hall, something or someone disturbed him. His bedclothes were reportedly pulled. He awoke to see a woman wringing her hands, pleading the words, "Pity poor Bradford." Whether vision, conscience, or something more otherworldly, the encounter is said to have shaken him. The following day, when royalist forces entered the town, Bradford was not destroyed as feared. Only a small number were killed, and the wholesale slaughter many expected did not take place. And so, according to legend, the first of Bolling Hall's ghosts may not have come to terrify, but to intervene.
So So many believe that it was the White Lady who appeared to Newcastle that night, pulling on his bed sheets and whispering those words, "Pity poor Bradford." Now, it happened here in what they now call the Ghost Room. And the White Lady, is said, does still make an appearance every now and then. But she's not the only ghost that's said to haunt Bolling Hall.
Many believe it was the White Lady whom Newcastle encountered that night, the pale figure said to have pulled at his bedclothes and urged him to pity poor Bradford. More than 3 centuries have passed since those days of war, yet she is still spoken of here. A quiet presence, a gliding shape, a woman who appears not to terrify, but simply to remain. But Bolling Hall does not belong to one spirit alone. Perhaps one of the most compelling modern accounts is that of a family who, much like any of us, simply came for a day out. They arrived on a Monday. The gates were shut. Of course, Bolling Hall does not open on Mondays. Yet at the entrance they met a man who explained this politely and advised them to return later in the week. So they did. When they came back on an open day, they mentioned their earlier visit to the staff member at the door and thanked him for his colleague's help. The receptionist frowned. There had been no colleague. On Mondays the building is completely locked. No staff, no caretaker, no one inside at all. He asked them to describe the man. Older, they said, glasses, smartly dressed, a tie beneath what looked like a caretaker's coat. The description unsettled him. Later, drawn by a flicker of recognition he could not quite place, he opened a cabinet containing photographs of former employees, men and women who had once worked within these walls. He showed them one image. "That's him," the family said at once. "That's the man we spoke to." The photograph was of George Collins, a former employee of Bolling Hall, a man who had died in 1967. And yet, according to those visitors, he had still been answering the door.
Now, there's a sign here that said this bed has initials and the date 1662 carved into it. It is typical of a 17th century tester bed with marquetry panels made for the wealthy. It was a family heirloom which was restored in the 19th century. Some believe that a man was killed while asleep in this bed by bandits looking for his money, which was said to be stored in a secret compartment inside the bed. Expert analysis proved that there is no such secret compartment, and this story is actually linked with another bed elsewhere in the country.
So 2 ghost stories we've heard so far, and both more of a helpful nature than anything sinister, but there's more to be told yet, and this next one might have you questioning the whole concept of time and space. On a dark winter morning just after 7, a staff member arrived alone to open the hall. Rain clung to the stone outside, and the interior still felt suspended in that heavy silence that comes before a building properly wakes. As he stepped into the kitchen, he saw a man standing clearly in the doorway. Not a shadow cast by poor light, not something glimpsed in passing, but a man, solid and unmistakable, dressed in old-fashioned clothes. They stared at one another, each startled, each acknowledging the other's presence. It is said that both their mouths dropped slightly, as though neither expected to see the other. Then the figure began to waver, not vanishing instantly, but trembling, distorting, as if the air itself were faltering. He flickered like a signal breaking apart, growing fainter until nothing remained. Was it a spirit tied to the house, or a brief and bewildering moment where 2 different centuries overlapped?
Now, lots of people have reported experiences in this hall. So paranormal investigators, staff, visitors. There's quite a few photographs and videos online as well, if you want to look into it, of people that believe they've caught things on camera, orbs and faces in the shadows and things like that. So if you have anything that you'd like to share with us about Bolling Hall, if you've got a particular photo or anything like that, then obviously please do feel free to comment below or get in touch via email, because we absolutely love to do a little bit more research on this and see how much we can find.
Old nurseries can hold a dark, sinister vibe all of their own. The toys that are no longer played with, the remnants of a childhood long since past, and the devastating emptiness of the fleeting moments of years gone by. Factor in a few antique prams, porcelain-faced dolls, maybe a rocking horse, and you've got all the sinister factors of a horror movie in the making. So, it's no surprise to my ears that the nursery at Bolling Hall is also meant to be haunted. Here, people are said to pick up on an uneasy stillness, others describing the atmosphere as charged. They don't see anything, they just pick up on the vibes. But then, at other times, people have seen things. The crib, for example, gently swaying on its own, as if being moved by an unseen hand.
Right, I think we've seen enough from in here then, so let's move and leave the nursery quietly alone.
The Blue Room is also a notorious paranormal hotspot. Here, the presence most frequently reported is that of a stern Victorian woman. She is not described as gliding softly or fading gently into view. Instead, she is said to watch, to stand, to observe. Visitors have spoken of feeling scrutinised, unwelcome, as though they have stepped into a room that is still very much occupied. And she may not be alone. Another figure is often reported in this same room, a man in a long black coat, sometimes seen standing near the fireplace, not moving, not speaking, simply present. There are physical experiences here too, the doorknob turning of its own accord, a slow, deliberate movement as though someone on the other side is testing the latch. Elsewhere in the hall, a different kind of presence is described. A tall male figure, imposing in stature, accompanied by a strong and deeply unpleasant smell. Those who have claimed to have encountered him say the odour arrives first, sudden and unmistakable, before anything is seen. Then the sense of someone nearby, heavy, close, uncomfortably so. Smell is difficult to dismiss. It is harder to misinterpret than shadow, and when multiple witnesses describe the same thing, it becomes harder still to ignore. But then there are the faces. Glimpsed in darkened corners, reflected faintly in glass, a pale outline where there should be none, the kind of sight that vanishes the moment you try to focus on it. Along the staircase and the balcony above, figures appear with surprising regularity. A woman in pale clothing has been seen gliding near the stairs, many believing her to be Caroline Wood, a former resident whose portrait still hangs within these walls. More than once, visitors have later recognised her face in that painting, the realisation arriving with a shiver. Others see only shadows on the balcony, shapes that pause and seem to watch the rooms below, and with those sightings comes the rumour that refuses to fade. Legend speaks of a lady who fell from this balcony. Did she fall? Was she pushed? I don't know. There's no official record of the event, but for a long time a stain on the stone floor was thought to have come from her blood, and there's supposed to be a golden stub embedded somewhere too, which many believe became embedded by her clothing. Is she one of the apparitions seen wandering on the balcony? I don't know. What do you think?
So today, Bolling Hall is a museum. It opened as a museum in 1915, and I believe I've said it took around 3 years to restore it into the state it is today. And what they did is they collected lots of artefacts from all over the place, historical pieces that people could enjoy in this museum. Some very beautiful and historical, some downright macabre.
Museums do more than preserve walls and beams. They preserve faces. Among the most arresting objects here is the death mask of Oliver Cromwell. He died in 1658, having risen from a relatively minor gentry background to become one of the most powerful men in England, first as a leading figure in Parliament's new model army, and later as Lord Protector after the defeat of the Royalists in the Civil War. Death masks were once created as mementos of the dead. Shortly after death, plaster or wax would be pressed carefully against the face, capturing every contour before time altered it. The result was not an idealised portrait, but an exact imprint, intimate, unflattering, permanent. To stand before one is to confront mortality without artistic softening. Now, although Cromwell never came to Bradford, the town itself was parliamentarian during the Civil War. A quiet irony considering Bolling Hall's royalist loyalties at the time. His mask was donated to the museum in 1933 and now rests here, centuries removed from the political violence that shaped his life. It is a strange thing to encounter, a face from history preserved in death, watching from within a house that once stood on the opposite side of his cause.
We are now in what is known as the Red Couch Room. Now, the key feature of this room, I'm told, is the Thomas Chippendale bed. Now, this was actually made for Harewood House, but it's been brought here instead. And this, I believe some of obviously the silk and everything is not original, that's been rebuilt. But I'll just briefly read this sign to you. In the late 18th century, this room was used as Charles and Caroline Wood's master bedroom with a small dressing room next door. So yeah, it says about the Chippendale furniture, the French couch bedstead with dome top in burnished gold and crimson damask hangings, which is the bed on display here. Only the gilt beech frame is original. Yeah. It's got I quite like the vibe in here.
Elsewhere, refinement replaces revolution. In the Red Room, sometimes known as the Red Couch Room, elegance reigns. It was once used by Caroline and Charles Wood, prominent members of the local gentry. Charles Wood, a Royal Navy captain, commissioned the Georgian drawing room before later dying of wounds in 1782. The space still carries that quiet confidence of status, polished, deliberate, carefully arranged. Here in the bedroom stands a Chippendale couch bed, originally made for Harewood House. Chippendale furniture takes its name from Thomas Chippendale, the master cabinet maker of the mid-18th century, whose designs defined an era of British craftsmanship. Only the gilt beech frame of this bed remains original. Its silk hangings, rich crimson damask, have been carefully restored. In the 19th century, the bed was dismantled and its canopy was thought to have been lost altogether, before the piece was eventually acquired by Bradford Museums in 1976. It is difficult not to imagine the weight of conversation and expectation once carried within this room. The bed is opulent, theatrical almost, its deep red tones lending the chamber an atmosphere that feels at once intimate and imposing. And it is perhaps unsurprising that some paranormal investigators claim to have picked up activity here too. If memory clings anywhere, would it cling to a room like this? Then there are the quieter artefacts. The childhood piano of Frederick Delius, the Bradford-born composer whose music would later travel far beyond Yorkshire, sits here in the nursery as a reminder that not all legacies are political or macabre. Some are creative, some are hopeful. And yet Bolling Hall has never entirely shied away from the darker curiosities of history. For a time, the preserved tongue of Mary Bateman, the so-called Yorkshire witch, executed in 1809, was displayed here. It was kept as a relic, a grim fascination, a tangible fragment of crime and superstition. Eventually it was removed, considered too disturbing for modern sensibilities. But the fact that it was ever here exhibited speaks to a long-standing human tendency. We are drawn to the macabre, even as we pretend not to be. Political death masks, naval commissions, Georgian luxury, a witch's tongue in a jar. It's an unusual gathering of objects. And perhaps that is what makes Bolling Hall feel so layered. This is not simply a preserved building filled with period furniture. It's a collection of ambitions, loyalties, beliefs and fears, arranged carefully within walls that have already witnessed rebellion and siege. The artefacts do not create the atmosphere here, they deepen it.
So that's it. Thank you to everybody for watching the video. A massive thank you to the museum, to Bradford District Galleries Museums Trust, I think it's called that, for allowing me to film. Now, I asked you a question at the beginning of this video, and that was, would you have dared to stay here overnight on your own? So, is your answer still the same now you've heard all the ghost stories? Let me know in the comments. And if you've had an experience here as well, let me know that too, because you know I'm really nosy and I love to hear your tales. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious and keep wanderlusting.